First of all, I would like to introduce Sabine Berghaus. She's a research assistant, a lecturer, and project lead at the Institute of Information Management at the University of St. Gallen. To everybody who's not from Switzerland or any German-speaking country and is not aware of the University of St. Gallen, is probably one of the best-known business schools in the world, certainly in the German-speaking countries. She's been working on digital transformation, innovation strategies, and mobile business. She's just returning from a conference on mobile business last week in St. Gallen, as I understand it.
Yeah. Actually, I'm not returning. We hosted the conference.
So you're returning to Basel,
right?
And so she's very deeply into that subject, and she has done research based on, I think, 150 or so companies that you've been talking to throughout the last years, coming up with something that is called the digital maturity model, and we'll be talking about this more later on. You are also, you have some practical background. You have been working as a senior information architect at Sapien Nitro in my hometown of Munich.
Also my hometown.
Also your hometown. So you disguise your Bavarian accent a lot better than I do.
Right. I'm still working on my Swiss accent.
Okay. Good. So, and we have with us Mark Halvorson. He is the Senior Director Creative Energy and Video and Chief Imagineer at Atlassian Software. A lot of really cool titles. I would really be happy to have at least one of them. And obviously, I suppose everybody here knows who Atlassian is, kind of a superstar company, I'd say, in the digital sphere, and the makers of Jira and Confluence. More or less the best of breed products by many, on which many agree in terms of ticket systems and stuff like that. And last but not least, Josh Valman, who has already introduced himself through his presentation today, who is the managing director of RPD International, a design and manufacturing company which has such a broad base of projects and products, and not your own, but as you're helping other companies, that it's mind-boggling. When we tried to do some preparation for today's talk, Josh was so kind to reply to me and say, well, I'll try to find a minute between now and when I take off to Basel this morning, but I have 37 meetings in between. Notably, he wrote that email yesterday morning. So that's how crazy his schedule is, but also maybe how varied the kind of projects are that he's doing. So first of all, since we've been talking about the digital transformation in general, and Boris did an excellent job in my eyes this morning describing why it is that much more virulent and why it is happening more now than it has been for a long time. We're all endangered of sitting here and living in a filter bubble saying digital transformation is happening, and everybody here is going, yeah, sure, because we all work on that. And of course, we don't have a lot of exposure with areas in life where that is not happening. Sabine here has done research on the subject and has talked to a lot of companies out there in Switzerland and beyond, I believe. And has tried to find out how far they are with digital transformation, how to measure that in the first place, when is it actually happening. And I would like to start with asking you about your findings on the state of the digital transformation and how much you think it is happening and how you try to measure it.
Yeah, I think it's definitely happening a lot, and I think there are most companies in Switzerland and also in Germany, I think they know that it's happening and they are aware of that. And I just told you I talked to this company and I said I'm doing research on digital transformation, and they said, okay, what's that? And we talked about what they're doing, and I asked them about all the digital projects that they're doing, and then in the end they said, oh, it's funny, we never thought of that as a digital transformation. We never used that term actually, But the way you describe it as a fundamental change to your business models and to our processes, our technologies, our daily work culture, all these things, they said, yes, we experience that in all these areas. And also from the research that we did on the digital maturity model, as a result, we tried to map all companies, or try to benchmark all companies that we asked in 5 maturity stages. So from the first stage, which would be like trying out digital in a way, up to having it up and running and optimizing. And I think very, very few companies are in this first stage of trying and out. So most companies, they already have digital projects, they have set their structures, they have changed their internal teams and how the teams collaborate. So I think it's nothing new. I don't know whether the term digital transformation, it's such a buzz term. I can hardly imagine how you cannot have heard of that. But I think definitely most companies are aware of the changes that are happening.
And as you're indicating, when you say they've changed structures, that would be a point where you'd say, well, it is happening in that company within your digital maturity model. Say if structures have become apparent that are supporting some kind of digital initiatives or are regularly serving other parts of the company in that sense, is that one of the measurement points that you're making?
Yes. So one thing is that we look at the organization and how teams are organized. Because I think what makes digital transformation different from just digital projects that you did before is that it's like a more fundamental change to your organization. So it does something to your organization. It's not an IT or not just an IT project anymore. And so it does change how teams collaborate. And I think one famous example is Spotify, how they organize themselves and how they organize their team structure. So they don't have an hierarchical structure anymore, or I think they never had, probably. But it's a very, very driven by Scrum, a very agile team environment. So they have squads where they have different roles that work together to realize one goal. Then they have, I think it's called guilds, where they have like overarching groups of people that look into the same topic of interest, and then they organize the different roles. So it's a very flexible model that allows them, depending on what project they have to do, to reorganize their teams in a very flexible way. And I think many companies sometimes then would reply that, oh, it's easy for Spotify, they are a startup. We are a big Swiss company, we have hundreds of employees, we cannot organize ourselves in such an agile and flexible way. But I looked into Spotify actually, and they are not a startup anymore, and they have been around for a couple of years now, so I think they are beyond the startup stage. And also they have, and I actually didn't know that, but I looked it up, they have 1,500 employees. So they're not like 30 or 100 people, but they are actually a huge global company. And this shows that also, I think, bigger companies and even large companies, for example, like Swisscom, they start to reorganize their team structures and try to get more agile and more flexible in the way they work.
Josh, as you're servicing companies who are probably trying to evolve in terms of transforming their business in a digital direction, do you see the same thing happening? Is there often structural change within companies that have been traditionally a lot more hierarchical, as Sabine has described?
I guess so. The advantage of being in a world where there's a lot of software layers is you remove middle managers, you remove staffing levels you might have had 20 years ago that are purely your role is to take information from one side of the office and give it to another side. And programs like the Atlassian programs and other project management and interfacing tools are all removing that layer. So there's definitely a group of people who've just lost their job. That's happening slowly. You're probably getting to the point now where there's no longer anyone hiring middle managers in that sense as they used to be 20 years ago. But I think, as you say, digital transformation is a brand name. Most companies nowadays have heard of the internet and are trying to utilize some form of software within their company. I think it would be crazy to suggest that anyone in at least mainland Europe, the UK, US is not using some kind of digital element in their business. And even on the shop, mum and pop kind of stores, even at that level, you've seen very good adoption of EPOS systems and everything else. I think the question will be where that goes and how fragmented that market becomes in terms of smaller volumes of users of lots of different software, or whether we see one software company dominating like SAP did 10, 15 years ago.
Well, going back to the argument that structural change in that sense of deconstruction of certain hierarchical organizational patterns would you support that this is a sign of maturity, that a company that does that or has even some kind of cater inside of it that is servicing other parts of the company in such a cross-functional way as a sign of evolution in that sense?
I'm not sure I'd suggest removing hierarchy from an organization suggests they have any lesser or further understanding of technology. I think in some worlds that works, in some worlds it doesn't. So, in a service business, if you didn't have hierarchy, there'd be no customer complaint escalation policy, and hence it would never work. You'd never be able to service a large company if every time there was an issue, there was no one to escalate to.
Maybe it's less about removing hierarchies, but about removing silos, and silo thinking.
Having cross communication across. Well, I guess that's a good sign of a modern company. Maybe not a digital company. Maybe a digital company is a modern company. But a modern company is where if you work in product, you know a lot about what's going on in marketing, and if you work in marketing, you know everything that's going on in HR. Whereas previously the HR office wouldn't even know where the design office is and where the marketing office is. And that's, I think, is a sign of a modern company, a new way of doing business, which incorporates this whole digital transformation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember things from university which are probably 20 years old, which suggested the same thing without any digital transformation on the horizon. But of course, I mean, the idea of breaking up silos and having cross-functional units that dedicate themselves to solving pressing problems in the changing ecosphere, that's nothing new in that sense. What other ways of measuring digital maturity are among your model?
When we look at the entire model that we built it on the business engineering framework that we use at the University of St. Gallen, or more specifically at the Institute of Information Management, to gain a holistic view on these business transformation, because as you said, actually it's nothing new. It has been, or businesses have been transforming themselves forever. So this model looks at on top of strategies, they influence processes and they rely on the technology. But also this model got expanded towards the product side. So digital technologies change your product offering or your service offering, and it also changes your company culture. And the most recent addition to the business engineering framework was the dimension of the user on top, because clearly in the digital world, the behavior of users change, and this is a huge driver actually for this transformation. It's not just technology. Of course, technology is evolving fast, but it's also that behavior changes and the way people shop and research, etc. All these things, that changes. So in all these dimensions, or we defined 9 dimensions of maturity or of capabilities that organizations need to develop or need to obtain. And then we dug deeper. So actually how we developed the model was just by looking at literature, by conducting interviews with experts, and we had an expert panel that reviewed over multiple rounds the capabilities until we said, like, okay, now this is this is the holistic view on the topic, because we all speak about digital transformation, but in the beginning I discovered that many people mean different things. Some are really only talking about IT changes, and it's not just IT changes. And this makes the difference. And this is why we said, okay, we do have to have a model that kind of conceptualizes this entire framework of digital transformation, and kind of, first of all, explains what it is, or in what areas it is happening.
As you, Mark, Atlassian obviously is a digital business. Never has been anything else. You didn't start out doing hiking shoes or something. So how do you go about this? Still, digital transformation isn't done for you. You're still evolving, and obviously there must be questions for you, other disruptive forces that might be interesting. Maybe you even have an analog transformation unit that is looking at producing hardware that will help you grow. I don't know. Maybe Josh here can help you with that. So how about that?
Well, we were digital out of necessity. Our company was started in Sydney, Australia, and so it was two guys that were basically bootstrapping this company, and they were working mostly with customers in Europe at the time, and they just needed to be online in order to do business, and they devised their whole business model around that. They wanted to be low cost, sell online, make it cheap enough that anybody could buy it with a credit card. No salespeople, and everything that we built kind of fit into that model really well. So everything that I always say, developers are lazy, and we were a company that was created by developers. So everything that we build is kind of to smooth the process and make things easier for people. Automate anything you possibly can. If there's a step that's able to be automated, then do it. There was a slide in a presentation I saw earlier today that said, if you're doing a manual step, you're not lazy enough, which I thought was a great quote. But what I think where I was going with that is you're never done transforming. And for us, we're a 12-year-old company now, so we put systems in place now 10 years ago that we're upgrading and improving and changing and making better. So it's a process. It's not like you're just digital. We're digital, but we're also transforming too.
Yeah. I have this sentence going around my head since yesterday, trying to think about what I might ask you. And one of this is there's this famous saying of the revolution is eating its children, and obviously for a company like Atlassian, which has been around for a while, I keep thinking, well, there has been an AOL as well. There have been other companies, and they're still there, obviously, but they've changed quite a bit, and also in terms of their reach and importance and so on. So how do you protect from that, if you can?
So one of the advantages we have in our business model is that we don't have a sales force that we have to pay huge amounts of money to go out and sell our product for us. That means we can take the money that we would invest in that force and invest it back in the product. So our main focus is making products that are so great and easy to use that they sell themselves. And then we have a word of mouth business model where you use it in one place, you tell people about it, and you take it from company to company. So I forgot what the question was. Sorry, I do a lot of improv, and I never know what's going to come out of my mouth. So I'm really these things terrify me.
Well, the question was really: is the old economy is somehow famous among these ranks for being those people over there with that "it can't happen here" mindset, And we're sitting here, and we're very probably in the exact same mindset. And so I'm maybe as an outsider from a research perspective, that's different. But as an insider, I would think that is generally always a danger that is there for a software vendor, for a service provider. and also for a solution provider, if you want to call it that. And obviously, as the agility of the organization is one of the major points of being able to adapt to something so revolutionary and so deep-ranging as the digital transformation. I was wondering, aren't we, shouldn't we be clever to look at our own problems and our own kind of blindness to these challenges?
One of the things that I thought of with the Spotify example, which is a great example of a company that's being very agile, like we're building products differently today than we did even 10 years ago. It's all rapid release cycles, getting features out quickly. It's not anymore about like packaging something up and shipping it. And Spotify, as an interesting example there, they're being very public about how they're organized inside, right? That could be considered their special sauce, but instead they're taking that message and saying like, this is how we do it. You should do it this way too, or whatever works for you. And I think that that's interesting as you're seeing a lot of companies doing that these days, where they're being very public and open about how they're accomplishing what they're accomplishing.
I believe there's also Zappos is a good example with their holacracy approach that they've been promoting far and wide. In terms of the businesses that you've been looking at, I imagine, as you, I think, indicated before, that it's sometimes very difficult for those to have both kinds of structures under one, and also both kinds of mindsets within one organization. And Boris Kraft this morning pointed to the example of Kodak, where they actually invented the digital camera, but were not able to actually keep that invention and do the best with it, because it would have killed everything else within the company. So what are your findings on that? What are good examples?
I have actually been thinking a lot about the term of agility, because obviously in my interviews and everybody has been saying we have to be agile, we have to be fast, we have to be quick. And while this is true, what I often discover, or what the term that I actually like better is elastic versus agile. Because this is, when you look at how companies, or what challenges that companies deal with today, this is actually what reflects reality in most companies. Take the example of a big insurance. They said our company is 150 years old, and the oldest IT systems that are still running and that we're still using, they're more than 30 years old. And at the same time, while we have to maintain these systems and still rely on these backends, we want to do responsive web design, do mobile apps, and be very flexible in our front end. So you can imagine that this is like a huge challenge. And I think then it's rather about elasticity in an organization, which is more the image of you're stretching out to new areas that you find relevant, new innovative technology that you want to adapt. And then you have to maintain this tension. You have to still hold on to the old systems, and this is a huge pain point and huge challenge. And then after some time, you can let go and move forward and build up tension again. Or you can also, sometimes it might be that a new trend or a new fashion IT is not holding its promise, and then you can let go again and return to your old systems. But that is, I think, this tension, I think the IT people that I talk to, they all mention that we have these old systems, we have these inflexible backends that we still have to maintain, and at the same time, we do want to be an innovative company and adapt all these new technologies. So I think this is something that is clear, and it has also in the study, it was the biggest pain point. We had a free text entry on the on the last page of our survey, and it said like, "What's your biggest challenge?" And I think half the people wrote IT legacy systems. So yeah.
Well, I think agility is a big topic, and what digital transformation is doing is allowing agility in companies, not just in IT and infrastructure, but in a company as its whole. If you look at a traditional version of what our company was 20, 30 years ago, you've got a huge amount of capital investment. If you did 5% of your sales this month as over last month, you'd die. because you have those fixed costs that you need to be paying every single month. There's not enough cash in the company to survive, and that's why such big businesses are starting to disappear. Kodak was at a very high number of fixed costs, very high fixed costs for their R&D, and if they couldn't put their R&D far enough forward to be shipping product, they're relying on product that's 2 or 3 years old to be selling for them to survive. When you look at our business, we've got over 100 factories, very little capital assets. We retain our capital assets by giving so much revenue to those factories that they can't survive without us. We don't feel the need to own 100% of those factories because they wouldn't survive if we weren't there. And so everything we employ and everything we own is directly related to sales. If we had 0 sales tomorrow, we had 1 sale tomorrow over 300 today, the company would just shrink. The company would not die. We create consistency for our people in our factories by moving them from project to project. But at the base of it, every single thing we do is related to a sale or a project. And so we have that agility within the company that is only possible with the communication layers and the project management layers that we have from being a software and a digital company at the heart or the core.
Of course, that reminds me of what you said earlier. We stood outside when you said that actually there is an agility beyond that. There is an agility in economy as a whole, which would come from the fact that product development cycles would get so short that I think you were now talking about a third of the traditional, in I guess not every industry, but in many industries, and you were dreaming about a world where that would be a few hours. Would you like to elaborate on that? Because it seems like a vision it kind of powers you.
Yeah, well, the vision for us as a company is how short can you make a serious R&D cycle? How quickly can you launch a product into market? A traditional product to market cycle over the last 10 years, maybe the average is about 24 months, maybe slightly shorter for a few standout companies. We're now able to move into a very large company and 3 months take a product from problem through concept, development, iteration, certification, all the way to shelves in at least one country. 3 months. I mean, what's that? It's 12 weeks. It's nothing. But what if that was 1 week? What if that was one afternoon? For us, the mission isn't necessarily what we're creating with each project that we're working on. It's the process of how that project comes to life. Because if you can implement that every time somebody has an idea, within 3 hours, they can get that on a shelf and they can market test that. How quickly can an economy move in terms of iteration and innovation in design of product, design of software, design of organizational changes? If you can make that process, that's our focus. The focus for us as a company isn't necessarily about innovation in products, it's about innovation in process. And I think that's a very interesting shift in where a lot of focus is for a lot of service companies, but also product companies.
Absolutely. That's also in my experience one of the key factors. We've talked about this before, that even if top management agrees on doing things differently, that doesn't mean that everybody else in the company will support that vision and will
understand that they have the option to support it.
Yeah.
It's the communication that's more of an issue than even the option to support something.
And sometimes you have change agents. Sometimes you only have an email going out to everyone from. We'll work to
hey guys,
differently from
new innovations coming. Do you want us?
Yeah. It would be interesting to know if you guys at Atlassian are actually also consulting people about, in a direct or maybe in another way, about how to cope with change that comes about by using your products.
Well, as I was saying outside, like one of our values is open company, no bullshit. Like we are a very open company about most everything that we do, and part of that is just the way our model is set up. Like we build and sell products to help teams collaborate, and we make them so cheap that it's democratized and any team can have them. But just giving you the tool doesn't necessarily make you an effective team. There's a lead by example role that we've taken where we share best practices. We definitely share how our teams get things done. We have microsites that are focused around just kind of thought leadership around how teams work and how teams can work better together. So we're huge proponents of agile methodologies and like finding the right way to do agile for your team. And it just so happens our tools provide agile functionality, but the first step is to be agile. The second step is to figure out how to automate that agility. So we love sharing what we do, and I think in thinking through what you were just saying about it's not what you're currently making. It's like the stretch goal of how you make it. Like we have a North Star of advancing humanity through the power of software. So we're unleashing the potential in teams. And that is a purpose the company exists for that is above, to some degrees even making money, right? Like we want to make a difference more than that. So like we exist to spread effective teamwork around the globe in some ways.
Was there evangelist also among your titles? I can't remember.
I collect titles. I have several. So.
Actually, we're actually using HipChat with our student teams, and because I teach a course where we do kind of project coursework with students where we get small student teams together and they actually work with real companies in order to solve an actual question. And we thought HipChat is a good tool to organize the team because we also want to teach our students like the new way of working. And so we set this all up and said like, here's HipChat, use it. And there was very little activity on it. I was asking the students like, how do you like the tool, and how do you actually organize yourself as a team, because I see very little activity here. And they said, yeah, it's okay, but we use WhatsApp for that. Yeah. So it was funny because I thought it was interesting for me to observe how these young 21-year-olds work together and collaborate, and apparently they didn't like adapting another platform, but they were like, okay, WhatsApp, it's what we use anyway.
I was just reading an article this morning about the latest hot messaging app is, I think it's Jot, something like that, and it's really popular around like the 12, 13-year-old crowd, which, and the reason behind that is they don't have data plans on their phones, but they have iPods that they can go and chat on, and so it's a way to do one-to-one messaging over Wi-Fi, where they can kind of use, and I think it actually even did it peer-to-peer over Bluetooth or something like that. But basically, thinking about your audience and thinking about what they're using it, like with the WhatsApp example, it might just be data plans and the fact that you can do the whole Wi-Fi only thing where you get the messages when you're on Wi-Fi. But that stuff is super interesting.
My question earlier was directed at the problem of having to create some kind of a trickle-down effect of the transforming process among hierarchies, where you have probably a top management that really pushes a certain envelope forward, and then you have other areas and they really need to adapt to it, because one man's solution might be another person's unemployment. And in your example, you just said more or less that, well, we're leading by example and we have this North Star and so on. And it's kind of inspiring, but that needs people to look at it and be able to transfer the knowledge gained and so on. But we've been talking earlier about this very hard topic that very often you have middle management. You suggested earlier that just throw them out, but you have...
People have always suggested that.
Yeah.
It's only now become practical.
Yeah, that's the basic idea, basically. Yeah, that's how the Roman Empire has worked as well. But, back to that, we talked about that, and I know you've been even giving out awards to companies that have been particularly successful at transforming their business, and that must have a lot to do with doing that transformation throughout different hierarchies and actually operationalizing what this probably rather small and agile team has come forward with. And it would be great to hear if you have some advice in that sense.
Yeah. What was pretty clear, or what quickly became clear during the interview session that I did before, was that if you don't have your top management on board that is clearly committed to digital transformation activities and to transforming the company, then it does not work. It's not something that it just can be done with a bottom-up initiative, but you do have to have top management's commitment, because it is about transforming the company. And it's not, as I said before, digital projects, they're no longer just in IT, but they do affect marketing and all other departments as well. And then it's getting very different or difficult if you don't have like a central budget or like a central vision what should be done. Then you end up with like every business unit is kind of doing like their own activities, and this is not what you want. So you have to have your top managers on board. And one story that someone in the interview said that they only, in their company, they only started thinking about digital transformation when their CEO got an iPad and started using it and saw how easy it is and how fun. And then he said, oh, we have to do something there too. Because, yeah, then it was only then that he realized and started pushing this forward. So sometimes that makes all the difference. And another thing that I was assuming, actually, when I started out on that, I thought, maybe, what about the employees? Do you have to do a lot of work to convince your employees that you have to embark on such a journey? Because, yeah, sometimes it might be that if you digitize everything, that your job will probably be gone. So they might be scared of losing their jobs. But the companies that I talked to, they said usually it's not the employees. They are not the problem, because they are very open towards new technologies. They are using that in their everyday life. So they are very open on using that and on getting on to this transformation. But where the problem is actually at the middle management. That sometimes people said the CEOs, they sit on shiny panels and talk about their visions of digital transformation, and this communication then goes further. But the middle management where they have to steer the projects and get them going and evaluate progress and monitor change. This is where, if they are not convinced, if they don't clearly understand where this is going, then they cannot communicate it further, and then this is where projects actually sometimes fail.
I was traveling through Frankfurt yesterday on the way here, and I passed through border control there, and there was a super long line for the all passports line, and then on the EU passports, there was no line, and on the EU passports, there were the robots that like check you in, and for the all passports, it was human beings checking people in, and the line was moving so slow, and I just was thinking, like, what's it like to sit and watch robots do your job and do your job better than you're doing it? You know, like, that has got to be painful. And it's not motivating them to do their job any better, right? So, like, the line wasn't speeding up. And I don't know, I just been doing a lot of reading about this stuff and found that fascinating.
Well, I think you're just an optimist, because the robots don't have guns, and the guys who control the non-EU nationals have the guns. So that is, we don't entrust them with the guns yet. That's probably the difference.
I guess that's a good point.
Which leads me to some kind of elephant in the room that we here might not sense as much as people on the outside. But if you read the papers, if you still read papers, or are interested in what the critics have to say about digital transformation, there is, of course, a lot of fear, as you mentioned earlier, of a so-called automated economy. There are lawmakers for years now who have been predicting social unrest in all of the industrialized countries. And just recently I had a conversation with two of my friends, one of them being a researcher at CERN here and with the Large Hadron Collider, and the other one is actually in the Department of Defense. And we were talking about digital transformation, or this disintermediation and disruption and all those unemployed people that we might be faced with, always assuming we might not be one of them. So in the end I asked them, so what would be the one thing that you suggest to do? And the guy from CERN said, well, I think you should develop a very complicated model that you can use for assessing risk, and build some software around that, and you're going to make millions. And the guy who was working for the DoD said, I think you should go out and buy a diesel generator. And that is kind of the span of how you can think of these things. And you can have a positive outlook on that, but you must not have one. And as we're all human, I suppose we all have both sides. I would be really interested in hearing what you think is your outlook and what you say to people that you doubtlessly encounter as well among older relatives or people in other spheres that are heavily analog about that future that is there in store for them and your role in it.
Was that me?
Yeah, I mean, you're the guy with the North Star, so I'm starting with you.
I'm going to be optimistic again. It's all opportunity, right? Like when you take away tasks or things that consume time, you're opening up space for people to expand, gain knowledge, and build their skills. So I see all of this change as an opportunity for people to better themselves and find other things to do that fill up that space, even if it's just thinking, Like if you free up time in your day that you would have been wasted pushing papers around, you can spend more time with your children at night or things like that. So I think it's all opportunity to fill that space. I think there was a quote I read or something where they thought by this stage in human life we would be working like 4 hours a week or something like that. And that certainly hasn't happened. Like people fill up the time with whatever it is that they fill up their time with.
Maybe consider at the time that prediction was made, how much work would you have done in a week? Would you do the same amount of work in 4 hours now and you work X number of times harder? There we go.
Define hard.
Longer. So what you would have achieved in a week when they made that prediction, you now achieve in 4 hours, and hence the rest of your week is free to do it over and over again.
Absolutely.
Bigger and more.
But so we're just accomplishing more.
Yeah. Well, I would say that is the opportunity for data collection and usage of data. That is how much more efficient, how much quicker can we move, how much quicker can we use that data to, evolve and innovate. And then with that reduction in time, you do as much or twice as much in the same amount of time that you have in the day. The week is not going to become shorter. You're not going to reclassify the week as only being 4 hours long. You're just going to do more within the week that you do have available to you. I don't think Google are going to quite change the calendar app that much.
Yeah, so it's not an unemployment problem, it's a leisure problem.
People like to work, people like to be challenged, and nobody wants to sit on a beach for 4 days a week, do they?
I know some people.
There are some people, and those people will soon be exterminated by the robots.
They will be carried to the beaches and back.
They'll be taken to passport control to run all passports lines.
Yeah, but it's probably that tasks will change and tasks will shift. So, of course, computers will be able to do more things and be more intelligent and even more smart and be able to fulfill more tasks, even like non-automated tasks or analytical knowledge tasks. But still, there are things that humans can do better than computers, and so there will probably be a shift towards that. And actually, last week before our conference in St. Gallen, we had a little workshop where we were discussing this question: can computers be better strategists than humans? And actually, it was a fun discussion, and we actually ended up with a statement that computers might be able to give the answers, but humans are still asking the questions and deciding where we want to go. So, yeah, I'm also being optimistic, I guess.
Well, I think as you grow a company, you start very executional, and you have to do everything, and then as you get more and more people, you become more and more strategic about your thinking, until the point where, as a executive team, your pure role is to point an executional force. And I think maybe that's where the human race goes as technology develops, and you remove the need for humans to execute in any form. Humans become the point and shoot kind of control of robotics, and so no longer do you need project management software because the entire project is done by robots. But you do need to tell them what the project is and what the reasoning for that is, because I think we're very long way off robots. I'm not even sure that's physically possible for a robot to conceptualize what that problem is on that higher level, at the point where we have enough brain capacity to calculate how you could create a robot that does that kind of reasoning, we'll have a level above that is more strategic than even that.
Yeah. I think so too. As at least you two, I know that you're active on a global level, and you travel a lot and have facility for production in China and whatnot. And I suppose, Atlassian must have clients almost everywhere. What are you seeing, and what are the hot spots where's more progress happening in terms of digital transformation of existing businesses? And might there be other markets where we in old Europe might learn a little bit?
I think actually there's an interesting change of how you perceive location or hotspot of technology. I would say that the hotspot of technology is actually completely decentralized. There's a real hotspot of innovation and technology between countries. People can consulting together from Australia, Switzerland, UK, China, New York, all working together on a single project, in which case the country of their innovation might be on Jira, or it might be on Slack, or, they don't have a locale as such to work from. I think that's a big shift we've seen recently. There is no office for the largest and most exciting innovations going on at the moment.
That might be true, but on the other hand, I just returned from Copenhagen 2 weeks ago, and even all those little things of the daily routine you're having, everything is so much more digitized.
Because they're so positive.
It might be because they're so positive, and it might also be because I'm from Germany, so I'm going back. They're looking into the future and then returning to the medieval times in Munich. So that's at least my feeling, and I would think that if I had to consult people, which I regularly do, on digital transformation, I might send them off to different places for them to find out what happened in other companies in other markets, and so that would be one.
In that sense, Denmark is a very exciting place. We have an office in Aarhus in Denmark, and it's a fantastic place, because I think the attitude to adoption is very, very positive. The kind of experimental, let's see what happens attitude is very high there. It's very high in Hong Kong. Obviously, it's very high in San Francisco and London, but also it's quite interesting how that's changing in Paris as well. There's a much more positive attitude to technology and experimentation than there used to be. Maybe, I can't talk too far back because I don't have experience, but maybe 5 years back, I could compare the two.
All right. What about you, Mark?
Hotspots of... What was the key phrase of the question?
Well, companies really conforming to some kind of digital transformation process happening with them, and good examples that you've seen in places that were buzzing with that kind of energy. Because it might not be the usual suspects,
Yeah, I think we often talk about every company is becoming a software company, and the stories that you pull out of that are things like Domino's Pizza is a software company that happens to sell pizza, and Tesla is a software company that happens to sell cars, and I think one of the things that kind of ties into what you were saying about the no office and like the remote workers, like everyone's working all the time. And so one of the challenges is just to remember there's humans on the other side of that collaboration. There's some things I notice like on Confluence or in some of our tools where you forget that the person on the other side is a human being. And it's kind of like the equivalent of road rage, where you're driving down the road and you honk your horn at somebody that's like crossing the street or whatever. You would never do that if you were standing next to them. Like somehow being behind the glass of your automobile gives you the freedom to like be a jerk or whatever. And so one of the things that we try to do is to make the interactions as human as possible, and remember that the people you're working with are human beings. That didn't answer your question.
It was still quite interesting, so it's okay.
All right, I'll take it.
As for you, I mean, of course, I'm always thinking about, as you're in education as well.
Yeah.
What do you distill from that? And is there a course in digital transformation at the University of St. Gallen now, or can you graduate as a digital transformer?
Well, we have a master in business innovation, which would probably touch most of the things that we're talking here. I actually do teach a bachelor course, which is management in the digital economy. So where I teach, students of how our business model is different, how does a digital strategy work, and all these things. So, yeah. And I sometimes it's funny when we talked before about these agile team structures. When I ask my students to draw a symbol for a company or an organization, they draw a very hierarchical structure. And I thought that was kind of interesting because sometimes they are pretty conservative in their views. And I thought there are all these digital natives and Generation Y people, and they must be like used to completely new ways of working. But some of them I found them pretty conservative for their age. That's actually surprised me sometimes. But yeah, so it's basically when I teach these courses, sometimes these ideas that we've talked about, they are also new for them. But I think they from the way that they work and from the technology that they use in their daily lives, just really naturally, it'll be interesting what they grow into also.
And what they bring to the companies that exist today out there.
Right.
Yeah. I think there's a general question about governance. If governance is a service, something that where you transfer some kind of knowledge about how to go about with data for a company like Atlassian or a company like RPD. But in the preparatory talks, it became quite apparent that it didn't ring a bell. So, to put it bluntly, so I felt that it is probably not the right time for that. There are consultancies out there that do that now, that help companies who are digitizing their business or certain processes become aware of what is acceptable and what is not, what is good practice and what is not. But it doesn't seem to be a part of the offering of everybody in the field, at least not in these examples. But you might contradict me.
I think it's so we, as I said earlier, we always, with all our projects, want to collect as much data as possible, because the more data you have, the more interesting things you can find now, but the more interesting things you can find later, which help you iterate in the future. When you look back, you might find something that actually is pivotal to your business for the next 5 years, but maybe didn't factor in the current 5 years. With that comes all sorts of issues of signing on to give that data and understanding what kind of data you're giving as a user or a customer, which it's a minefield, and it's very different whether you're working in defence or you're working in motorsport or you're working in consumer products. I don't think there's one answer. I think every single kind of product or concept is different. I think there will always be a different way to look at it and a different way to talk to your customers about it. But I do have a very strong opinion that it's not your right as a human being to have a mobile phone. It's not your right as a human being to have an iPad. By buying those products, you're buying into a lifestyle and a whole concept of data collection and the use of data to develop a product. And hence, a big part of that purchase contract is about data and is about the fact that you're entering data into a central platform. Which I think needs to be factored into a lot of these conversations where people are blaming Apple or blaming Google for collecting data that actually creates the services that people love so much, but hate the fact that they're using data to do it, which is an insane contradiction, but isn't explained well enough to people. Maybe that is the fault of Google, that isn't explained well enough why they collect their data and how they use their data and how pivotal that is to the experience. So maybe you're right that there is a gap in the market for that consultancy on communication. As much as you need a communication agency for your marketing, maybe you need a communication issue for your legal and your data awareness policies. I don't know what you think.
I think it's important to take it seriously, and to make sure that you're open and transparent about how you're using that data. have a terms of agreement, like a whatever privacy policy, make sure that people are aware of it. There's differences between people that are logged into your systems versus people that are just anonymously browsing your systems, don't have any private PII, personal identifying information collected if they're anonymously browsing your site, just things like that. And, listen to your customers and take it seriously, I think.
And eventually it might also be something that's governed through different offerings, really, where there would be, you could buy maybe or use something from Google, and maybe there is another alternative which will have a different communication about how they collect data, what data they're collecting in the first place, and so on. And then you might make that decision. I think that's already in place. It's just that there's just not enough demand, right?
We look at smoke alarms, look at Nest or thermostats. Nobody's ever considered privacy concerns with their smoke alarm before. And now you're in a situation where, do I really want somebody to know whether my house is on fire? Well, I kind of quite like somebody to know about it, but do I want them to know how warm it is in my house? Do I want them to know whether there's somebody in my house? All these questions are starting to come up. And I think that now is what happened when you went from having a phone that was plugged into the wall to having an iPhone. That privacy discussion was never had, and I think now we're having that same transformation, but we have that awareness at a much, more broader level to have that conversation. But it is a conversation. There is no right and wrong answer, I don't think.
Yeah.
One of my favorite features of the Nest thermostat is there's a light that comes on when you move in a dark room. And I realized, now Google knows every time I go to the bathroom in the middle of the night, right? That's the level of information that they could potentially be gleaning off of that.
There are other situations where that might not come in handy,
True. Burglars, maybe.
Yeah, probably burglars.
Yeah. But I think now is the time that we can actually discuss all these questions. This is exactly the right time to have this discussion on what should we do with data that we collect, because we are empowered, and I think this is the entire wave of digital transformation. It's not something that is just happening on us, and we're helpless, but we can design this change. We can evaluate where we stand and what we want the future to be, and then make the decisions that we want and design the services in a way that we want them to be. So I think, and I agree with you when you said it's probably being transparent, and because I have a background in user experience design, so my first question would always be what is it that the user wants, and what would be best for the user in that situation, and then take that as my guideline for designing a product or a service.
If I may rephrase what you said earlier about nobody has it has no human right to an iPhone or something like that, that is of course a very provocative way of also saying something like the choice is in the hands of the user, or it should be eventually, and there will be offerings if the demand is there. That's because on the other hand, I believe we cannot look to lawmakers that they will solve this issue for us. If the whole Snowden affair and the non-changing of things afterwards teaches us one thing, we cannot hope for them to solve that for us. And it's probably not even their role anymore in terms of the agility of adaptive processes and prototypes and so on. I mean, it's over. And then in that light, I mean, we can only look at the empowerment of the user.
Legislation will be made by the user, and eventually the government will pick up on what the user's saying and they'll agree with the majority. The government are not ahead of the technological advancements of Apple and Google and their users. The government are 5 years behind, and they'll wait to see what happens, and then they'll make that legislation as if they thought of it. Sorry, I'm going to get arrested now, aren't I?
Thank you very much for coming out, for staying out this late in the evening, and let's party!